Yeah, we're talking about the stories and the experiences of those women who came here as convicts. Melita Rowston is a Sydney based writer, director, and performer. And this latest project of hers involves finding and staging those lost voices of Irish female convicts. So, a big, warm humour and welcome to you, Melita. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Melita, do you have convict history in your family? Was that the starting point?
I do have convict history, but they were English and they came in the First Fleet. So we have quite an extensive family network who've done a huge amount of research into their backgrounds and their lives. They ended up in Van Diemen's Land as well. I'm sort of the person who looks for the hidden histories and the lost stories. And we did have Irish ancestors come here. They came after the famine, so they were on one of the famine ships and came to Sydney in 1851. And that side of my family just kept saying, "Oh, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it." So for me, that's the place I like to go. The dark places that haven't been spoken of yet. So when I learnt that the majority of Irish female convicts ended up here in Parramatta at the Parramatta Female Factory, they had over 56% of Irish convicts there, I thought that was an interesting path to follow. And in the course of doing that, finding out more about my family history as well.
Yeah, more on that in just a moment. I'd be remiss here in Canberra to not mention the Rajah quilt that is on show here right now in the National capital as part of a century of quilting crafted by women convicts on their way to Australia. Did you uncover some stories that relate to some of their experiences in the course of this work of yours, Melita?
Yes, absolutely. The Rajah quilt is such a stunning piece of work, not only for the craftsmanship and the detail and the work done by multiple hands, which I love that as well. It's a multi-authored piece, but it's also one of the only remaining objects we have made by convict women. The things that remain, a lot of these ships, quilts were made. Quilts were also made at the Parramatta Female Factory, and they've all been lost to history because I guess when you talk about convicts and then you talk about women and then you talk about Irish women, people aren't very interested or weren't. So I love that this object has survived and talks to the resilience and the creativity of women and says we were here and our stories are important and need to be told. I think a lot of the stories I've been uncovering have been more in realm of those who were put into the third class, the worst of the worst, the ones who were rebelling against this colonial authority. And what we learned that on the ships, especially if we're focusing on that, when they came over, they found that the only other thing they really had to express themselves was their voices. So a lot of great convict researchers and historians have gone back through the records and found evidence written in surgeon journals, so the sort of doctor who was on the ship, showing how the women used their voices to resist authority. Especially, there's one great example from a ship in 1830. There was a big brawl that broke out on deck. So the captain put them all below deck and locked them in, and 250 women wailed for hours on end as a way to, express their feelings about the situation. And it got so bad that the sailors put down tools and said they wouldn't work until the women were released. So I'm interested in those kind of rebellions and revolts where they use their bodies and their voices to claim space for themselves.
What an incredible protest and act of rebellion. 250 wailing women. Wow.
Yes.
My hairs are standing up. I do have some beautiful audio, and thank you so much for sharing different pieces of audio with our listeners, which I'd love to share, including in particular a lament, a powerful cry from Kitty Gallagher. Before I play it, can you provide some context there about what contributed to Kitty's wailing cry?
Absolutely. Kitty is one of the only examples we have left because this, it's called queena or keen in English, and because it was sort of performed around a funeral context at a wake over a dead body, when we did have the technology to record these things, the Irish felt it was a bit disrespectful to record it in situ. So the recordings that we do have, again, because this is an actual female tradition, it was passed down orally from generation to generation. And it was also, the first records of it written down are from the 7th century. So it's a pre-Christian tradition, which probably gives you an idea why we don't have many recordings of this tradition. So this recording we have of Kitty is in its traditional form. She's wailing the loss of a young baby, which obviously in that era happened a lot. And we're hearing the poetic lament for this child in this piece, and she's just talking about her loneliness that she feels without this child that was in her and a part of her, and the sense a year later, this is recorded, and she's still feeling that absence and loss. And it's a very poetic and sad and melancholy example of the queena.
Wow, what a powerful cry, Melita Rowston.
Yes, it's quite beautiful and haunting. Every time I've played it for different audiences, some people have cried for hearing the full excerpt, yes.
Absolutely, and we also have some audio here of Lydia. Tell me more for Lydia and the
Yes, well, this
Wake
is an
project.
example. Oh, sorry. Yes, this is an example more because the queena comes in 3 parts. The first part was kind of a calling together of people, a repetition of sayings such as my love and my sorrow, my loss, my beauty. So kind of calling, because these were performed very publicly with lots and lots of people around. So it was sort of a bringing together of the community to focus in on the death of the person. Then they would go into the middle section that you've heard an example of, lamenting their life, the good and the bad. And a lot of the women used that part, the poetic part, to actually express angst, anxiety, anger at those in control, whether they be the Catholic Church, the colonial rule, or the patriarchy. But then at the end, what you're going to hear next is when everyone joined together in the cry, which they called the goal. So this was the kind of the release, the real expression of anger and frustration and passion. And it was, the way to round out the song and help everyone to release whatever emotion was in their body. It's a very visceral sound.
Wow, what a raw sound. And that Lydia's queena comes from a recording from the Keening Wake project. Lydia Annam Eyre, interviewed by May Gavin back in 2017. My guest on ABC Radio Canberra Mornings is writer and director Melita Rowston, who's been going through the archives. She travelled to Ireland as part of this incredible work to stage a new production on the lost voices of Irish female convicts. What a rich history to draw upon, Melita.
Absolutely.
And tell me more about the play that you've created. I understand you just had your first reading over the weekend.
Yes. I guess I'm doing all of this as part of my PhD project at the University of New England. And when one does a PhD, you need to kind of be working on something that you're very passionate about because it covers a couple of years. And when I have been in Ireland researching my family history, there are times in the traditional pubs where someone will stand up and the whole room will fall silent and they'll sing a seanos, an old song in Irish. And those times are so palpable, and you sense that they're actually, because of it's an oral tradition, almost calling their ancestors into the room. and bridging two worlds, if you like, but singing a song, telling a story that is something that's been handed down to them. And that sat with me for quite a while, and I thought, how could I take this really intense, powerful moment and put it in a theatre in Australia? And I thought on this for a while, and then I remembered my passion for convict history. I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but ever since I can remember, my parents on the Sunday trip or on holidays would take me to convict sites, and I again had a real fascination with the convict story because it is so hidden and lost, and we don't hear the voices of the prisoners, we hear the voices of the British authorities. So I guess for me, that's the inspiration for the project. I thought, because this was an oral tradition, it would have been brought here. It would have been the only connection these women still had to home, a home they would never see again. And I wondered what that would be like, bringing that into a theatrical play. And then when I started learning about the history of the Parramatta Female Factory here on the outskirts of Sydney in the west, that the women were there, that they used their voices and song to rebel, and that at that factory, which was the first institution opened in 1821, specifically designed for the control of women, us incorrigible women, I thought this would be a kind of very interesting place to explore, because they were the first recorded actions and rebellions of women in the Australian colonies at that site. So it was bringing together those two worlds and doing a lot of historical research, but obviously because there's not much in the record, I found that going to Ireland and treading those paths, going to those penal sites, going to the land that my ancestors farmed was another way to feel the places and experiences in my body, and then write these voices, creatively fill in the gaps, really, and give these women a voice, because they are so forgotten to history.
Are your characters drawn from real women?
They are a combination. For example, there was a young girl who was in Wicklow, which is south of Dublin, and she murdered her child, unfortunately, just because she was so young and didn't know how to look after it. And so she was transported here, and some historians have done a lot of work on charting her journey to Australia. So I did, for some characters, use real people, and others I just took fragments of different people. There was a famous riot in Cork. I visited the site of women. Again, they used to riot over there the night before they got on the ship as well. Bit of a tradition, but mainly probably because of their fear and anxiety as to what was going to unfold. So I was able to pull together scraps of information about those women in Cork, and I met some local historians in Cork and learnt about the slums and the terrible state of Cork at that time. And so I sort of built characters out of a composition of different histories and stories that I was gathering along the way.
If you've just joined us on ABC Radio Canberra, you're listening to writer and director Melita Rowston, who's talking about her work to create a new work that's going to be performed in Sydney, and it's all about those stories of the lost voices of Irish female convicts. Will songs be part of this production?
Absolutely. We actually opened the show in the middle of the riot with the Queener as the first sound the audiences hear in the darkness. So specifically, the Queener is very central in all its forms, so as a war cry, an act of rebellion, but as you heard with that beautiful song of Kitty, also as a lament for people and histories that are gone to them. And we'll also be using some other, I've been into the archive and dug up old 11th century war songs, Irish war songs, and traditional sean-nós songs, which tell more about the nostalgic landscapes of Ireland, because obviously there's a longing for land that is very much part of the Irish diaspora psyche. So songs they'll all be in Irish, and it will be that sense of us, our bodies, as opposed to our brains, taking in another depth of emotion and experience in the theatrical context to really feel that experience of forced immigration.
Melita, will this production tour, might it come to the national capital?
I am very much hoping so.
Southern New South Wales?
Yes, I feel, and in Ireland as well, I worked with the translators over there and various historians, and they're all asking when's it coming to Dublin, because interestingly in Ireland, they're much more focused on the people who had emigrated to America, North America, and they haven't really thought about all of those Irish convicts who came to the Antipodes. So it's interesting that it's a history they're not that interested in or know much about. So when I was there, they were asking, is it coming here? We need to see it. And I'd love to tour it around Australia because I think it's relevant to all of our states, and it's such a powerful story that needs to be told. It's kind of like that quilt. It held on
It
in the
endured.
shadows, and it's found its way to the light. I feel like these stories have held on against all sorts of obstacles, and have just, glimmers here and there that we can pull together strands, much like a quilt, tapestry, and sort of learn more about these traumas that, can have a presence, a lingering presence today in this society.
Melita, thank you so much for being with us and sharing some of your work, some of your research, and also some of those very important stories, the lost
Thank you.
voices of Irish female convicts. And we wish you the very best of luck staging this new production. And please bring it to southern New South Wales, the capital region, our region, and the national capital.
Absolutely. It's on the list.
Melita Rowston, writer and director, joining us on ABC Radio Canberra. Anna Vida will be along very soon with the latest in the news headlines, and then a celebration of all things pies.